As we continue with crime and the topic of crime, talking about that here on Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago, and basically the court system. And who better to do that than, of course, Mr. Martin George. Let me welcome him to Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago once again.
Good morning to you, yeah. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's always a pleasure to have you on. Now, it's come up in recent times, not just in recent times, but I think more so with what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago with the crime scourge. More and more people are asking, bring back the death penalty, bring back hanging. It's never gone anywhere. It's still there.
That's right.
So many people in remand yard, 2,200. They're probably serving out a sentence there as we speak.
Yes.
For the length of time that they're there. Some of them even innocent.
That's right, yes.
But the backlog in the judicial system.
Okay, well, the thing is, we are, you know, I always like to be positive and look for solutions as opposed to, you know, just describing what the problems are. And one thing I can say is that the judiciary is due to roll out the new criminal procedure rules maybe by April. That's the timeline they're looking at. And in those rules, they are seeking to streamline the process in the criminal jurisdiction to ensure that, similar to what has happened in the civil jurisdiction under the Civil Proceedings Rules 1998, whereby you've seen a vast increase in the throughput of cases from filing to completion, you've seen a great reduction in the time frame. So therefore, I think the similar idea is that, look, in relation to criminal matters, the criminal procedure rules will have that type of effect. So it's a start, and the thing is, the point is, Confucius tells us the longest journey begins with a single step. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. In terms of the hanging and the implementation of the death penalty, as you say quite rightly, it's always been our law. I'm very pleased to note the initiative by the Attorney General, whereby he said he set up a case management unit to track the cases of the persons who have the various appeals to the numerous international bodies. Because if you recall, the last time we were able to, you know, implement the death penalty was when you had a small window of opportunity, if you could put it that way, between the completion of one appeal before one body and before another appeal was filed before another body. So therefore, there was no jurisdiction that any international body had over the matter at the time, and I think it's during that window. So I think it's a similar thing the AG is looking at to ensure that, look, you don't frustrate the implementation of the law by continuous appeals. So I think that's why he set up that unit, and I think it's an excellent initiative to keep a real-time track of where these matters are, so that if it is that someone does not have an active appeal, then the law can take its course, and of course you can you know, implement the death penalty, as has been the call from many citizens and many quarters in the country.
Because even at the conversations with the PM, he did actually speak, and he went through why it is, you know, hangings haven't, well, happened in Trinidad and Tobago. It's how many years that the
Pratt and Morgan,
Pratt and Morgan,
set the timeline
High
of 5
Court,
years.
Privy Council,
That's right,
Pratt
yes.
and Morgan, and all these various things that take a number of years.
Yes.
Which is simply why, you know, it's so long, the process in between. So he did say that, you know, they're looking to see how to shorten that. There was also the issue of Privy Council, for example. What's your view on the Privy Council? You know, people are saying we need to move to the CCJ, we need to govern ourselves, we need to basically be in charge of ourselves. And it's cheaper as well. Maybe it may take less time for cases to go through the system. What's your view on having the CCJ?
Well, the thing is, there are various schools of thought on it. And one thing, I mean, I personally would say is that at present, I'm still very much in favor of us retaining the Privy Council at this point. Of course, we may have a situation where our jurisprudence and our, you know, evolves to a scenario where we are able to say, well, look, yes, we can totally replace the Privy Council. At this point, I am not yet entirely convinced. And I don't think that it's something that there should be this active campaigning for. You know, I'm not sure that if it is that I want to exercise jurisdiction over your judicial matters, that I should be out there basically canvassing and campaigning for you to accept me. That should be something that should be a natural progression, that you have recognized that, look, I represent such value to you that you want to join and want to be a part of my, jurisdiction.
Okay, now the Prime Minister also mentioned at the conversations that basically he cannot tell the police what to do. He said the government, they have to make sure that those whose job it is to respond to the criminal element, they must do the job that they were hired to do, and there is only so much that the Prime Minister can do. He said too that there was enough police in Trinidad and Tobago. But how would you respond to that?
Because no, well, the thing is, insofar as the Prime Minister is making it clear that the responsibility for policing rests with the police, I agree with him entirely, because we have seen many times explanations, and I think sometimes there's the tendency for obfuscation, in that when you have the police service itself coming out and saying, well, it's not the police alone, it's society, and the criminals are coming from society, so society must look in the mirror and look to itself. While that may be true, I'm not doubting the validity of those statements. Whenever that kind of explanation comes from the bowels of the police service, I think the reasonable response that the public gives is that they see it as an excuse. They see that, look, why are you trying to shift responsibility? So insofar as the Prime Minister, I think, has refocused the responsibility for policing on the police service, I think he's quite right in that regard. Now, I know that in terms of resource allocation, the government has said repeatedly that they've given all the resources that are required, and you look at the budgetary allocation, certainly on paper, it does appear that, the resource allocation has been more than adequate. It's a question of how these resources are utilized, and that's why something like the manpower audit in the police service is critical, because you need to understand where are your resources being used, even your human resources. Are they being effectively deployed? Is it that you have too many officers in the stations, nice, comfortable, air-conditioned stations, ordering their KFC, watching cable TV? I mean, you just go to any station, you basically see what goes on. So, therefore, you ask yourself, in terms of that manpower audit, are we doing enough with the resources we have? Because certainly in terms of strength, you have not heard any complaint from the bowels of the police service to say, well, look, we need more boots on the ground, or we need more officers. So therefore, it seems that in terms of manpower strength, apart from their normal recruitment exercises, which are ongoing processes, there's no crisis of numbers. So therefore, I think it is quite right for the members of the public to expect that the police service takes that responsibility for policing the nation.
Now, there was another thing that came up, because there's been a lot of talk on social media for another state of emergency. People have been calling for that. Basically, we see that as being a short-term solution, but the Prime Minister definitively said that there will be no state of emergency. Basically, he said that in terms of, I'm trying to find it here, that there will in fact be no state of emergency as was done before. What do you think about a state of emergency at this point in time?
Well, the thing is, you see, it's not something that you call for, as if you're calling for a roti or a bag of cricks, to say, well, look, every Monday morning you say, I'm calling a state of emergency. It's something that really has to be, you exercise that discretion judiciously and, not wantonly and capriciously, and you certainly can't do it as a knee-jerk reaction, which I think, in a sense, is what the call and cry from the public is. But, on the other hand, we must understand and respect why the public feels that way, because the public feels besieged. People feel that, look, they cannot go out, they cannot, lime freely, they can't, I have lots of friends who just tell me that they would not go out at nights, so their social life is cut, they feel threatened, they feel unsafe to even go to a restaurant just to have a nice dinner, meal, so therefore you can understand the frustration of citizens, and the citizens will feel, well, look, hey, we are vulnerable. When they try to apply to get licensed firearms, they are denied. You haven't changed the legislation to allow them to have pepper spray or tasers, so therefore they feel that sense of vulnerability, and that is quite understandable, and I think that the government ought to take more cognizance of that and be a bit more sensitive in terms of its response to that. As to whether that response goes as far now to the other end to say, well, to call a state of emergency, I think you have to look at your end game. In other words, if I'm calling a state of emergency, what am I seeking to achieve? Yeah. Is it that there are, certain known persons who I have outstanding warrants for, and, these are known leaders in the community who are conducting gang activity, criminal activity, so therefore, okay, I have a list of 40 persons and I already have warrants for them. You see, it can't be something that you do capriciously. You really must have proper planning behind it. So therefore, in that case, am I then calling a limited state of emergency and say, well, look, my objective is to get these 40 people on this list arrested based on the warrants that I already have, and therefore I can now see that the effect will be an immediate decrease in criminal activity. If it's something like that and it's well planned, well thought out, then I would say, well, look, maybe it makes sense. But if it is just for the sake of saying, well, look, we are doing something, you also have to think in terms of internationally the image that it gives, because once a nation calls a state of emergency, that makes news around the world. It does. Then people feel that there's instability. They feel that, well, look, either the governing structure is unstable, the population is in danger, there are threats to, your tourism is damaged, So therefore, there are lots of implications to it. So it's not something that one rushes into willy-nilly and, does as a knee-jerk reaction. It's something that you really have to think of what's your end game. And I think if you do call it, it has to be very limited, very focused, very specific, with a clearly defined objective that you can execute and achieve within the time frame.
And then where you move from after that as well. So
yes. Exactly, because you don't want another fiasco like the anti-gang legislation where, you had persons arrested and, then basically you had to free all of them, and then now you're facing lawsuits, for, wrongfully, arresting them, wrongfully incarcerating them. So therefore, you really have to think it through rather than to give in to the public pressure of saying, well, look, as just a reaction, I'm going to, do this, off the cuff.
Martin George, thank you once again for coming and talking to us and clearing up a little bit too of what hopefully is going to take place and ease the judicial system.
Yes,
in April,
at least
you said.
Yes,
so hopefully
we have some signs of hope.
That should be coming our way.
Bright spots along the way, so that's a good thing.
So thank you once again, Martin George, attorney at law here on Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago.